Hi, I'm Alisa, and I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to a place where stories aren't just told, they are felt, where love isn't about forever, but about the moments that make us feel alive. Here, you'll meet the ones who walked into our lives like memories we never lived, the ones who made the present feel infinite, and the ones we had to lose to realize who we truly are. These are stories of love that felt like home, and of the quiet strength it takes to rebuild that home within yourself. If you've ever loved deeply, lost painfully, and still found the courage to begin again, you're already part of this story. So sit back, breathe, and listen closely, because somewhere between these words, you might just find a piece of yourself too. Welcome to He Called Me Home. It began on an ordinary day, the kind of day that never hints at what it's about to bring. The air was quiet, soft in a way that made everything feel suspended between now and never. That's when he appeared, not with thunder, not with some cinematic entrance, just there, standing at the edge of my world as if he had always belonged to it. His presence didn't demand attention, but it pulled it anyway. There was something in his eyes, a strange familiarity, as though I had known him long before I ever saw his face. There are people who walk into your life and you recognize them not from your past, but from something deeper, from the ache you've always carried, from the dreams you can never recall, from the loneliness you never admit. That's what he was, a living memory of something I'd been missing without knowing what it was. He spoke simply. His voice wasn't remarkable, but the way it settled in the air made it feel like it belonged there. Every word seemed to know where to land, how to linger just long enough to leave an impression. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something gentler, something that hummed beneath the surface, the beginning of belonging. Days passed, then weeks. He became a constant in the small spaces of life, the quiet pauses, the tired evenings, the laughter that came out of nowhere. It wasn't about what we said, it was about what we didn't have to. He understood silences. He didn't rush them, didn't try to fill them. Instead, he allowed them to breathe, as if every moment of quiet between us was its own language. There were times when it felt like we were two lost souls trying to remember the same forgotten song. His stories, his thoughts, even his pain, all of it carried echoes of something I could feel in myself. It was as if his existence was a mirror, not showing reflection, but recognition. He had this way of looking at the world as though it both hurt him and healed him. He'd speak of little things, like the smell of old books or the way rain sounds when it hits an open window, and in those moments he seemed both fragile and infinite. That duality drew me in. There was a depth in him that wasn't meant to be understood, only felt. There was one evening I still can't forget. We were sitting by a lake, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. The sun was folding into the horizon, and everything was drenched in the kind of golden light that makes time feel merciful. He turned to me and said, "Do you ever feel like you've met someone before, not in this life? Maybe not even in this world, but somewhere that felt safe?" The words hung between us, trembling with something sacred. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because that was exactly what it felt like, as if our souls had brushed past each other long before our bodies had met. Love didn't announce itself. It didn't come with declarations or promises. It slipped quietly into moments, in shared glances, in laughter that felt too pure to belong to this world, in the comfort of knowing someone was simply there. It grew like light through cracks, slow, patient, and unstoppable. But love, the kind that's born from recognition rather than attraction, has a strange fragility. It holds too much meaning to last untouched. It tests you, not through distance, but through depth. Because when you find someone who feels like a memory, the fear of losing them becomes a memory too, one that starts forming even as you hold them close. I remember the night it rained harder than usual. We sat watching it fall, not saying much. His hand found mine, and for a while the world was only that, the sound of rain, the warmth of his skin, the unspoken knowing that we were both afraid, afraid of how much it meant, afraid of how real it had become. He told stories about his life, pieces of his past, his dreams, his mistakes, and I listened, not as someone who wanted to fix him, but as someone who already understood the brokenness. Maybe that's what connection really is, not two people completing each other, but two people recognizing the same cracks in different patterns. I don't remember the exact moment I fell in love. It wasn't sudden. It was gradual, like the soft unfolding of morning light. One day I just knew he wasn't a chapter in my story. He was the quiet reason I wanted to keep writing it. Yet, somewhere deep down, I also knew the most beautiful connections aren't always meant to last forever. Some are meant to awaken parts of us we forgot existed. Some are meant to teach us what home feels like before life asks us to let go. He never promised to stay, and I never asked him to, because when something feels that real, it doesn't need guarantees. It exists beyond time, beyond possession. It becomes part of you the way music stays even after the song ends. Years may pass, faces may fade, but there are souls that remain stitched into your story. He was that, not a beginning or an ending, but a memory that still breathes somewhere inside the quiet of my heart. And even now, when the world feels unfamiliar, I remember the day he walked in, that stranger who felt like a memory I never lived, and for a brief, sacred moment, I knew what it meant to find home in another human being. And maybe that's all some people are meant to be, reminders of the love we were always capable of feeling, even before we knew how to name it. He never promised forever. He never spoke about the future, never painted pictures of what could be or what should last. Yet, somehow, every moment spent with him felt endless, like time forgot how to move when he was near. There was something about the way he existed, the way he saw the world. It made even the smallest seconds feel infinite. He carried an ease, a quiet assurance, as if he had learned that life was too fragile to waste on promises we can't control. He loved in moments, and in those moments, it was impossible not to believe that love could live forever. When he laughed, the world felt lighter. When he looked at me, it was as if he saw not just who I was, but who I was becoming. He didn't try to fix me, didn't try to mold me into his version of love. He just held space for me to exist as I was. And in that space, I found peace. There was a day we spent walking through an old street market, the kind filled with colors and sounds and chaos. He didn't buy anything. He just wandered beside me, occasionally pointing out something that caught his eye. I remember the way he'd look at simple things: a little girl chasing a balloon, an old man humming a song, a stray cat sleeping under a bench. He noticed the world like it was art. And in those moments, I realized he didn't need forever, because he was already living fully inside the now. I used to wonder why he never talked about what would come next. I thought maybe he was afraid of commitment, of losing control. But I came to understand it wasn't fear. It was wisdom. He knew that love is not built in promises. It's built in presence. In showing up every day, in the quiet consistency of simply being there. There were nights when we would just sit in silence, no music, no words, just the rhythm of our breathing filling the room. And somehow, that silence said more than any confession could. He would trace shapes on my palm with his fingers, absent-mindedly, like an artist lost in thought. Those small gestures, those unspoken things, they became the language of our love. He never said, "I'll love you forever." Instead, he said, "I love this moment. I love that you're in it." And somehow that was enough, more than enough, because love, when it's real, doesn't need eternity. It just needs truth, the kind that makes you feel seen, even in your quietest parts. He had this way of listening that made every word matter. I could talk about nothing, about the weather, a dream, a song, and he'd listen like it was poetry. And when I'd ask him what he was thinking, he'd smile and say just this, as if the moment itself was enough reason to exist. I remember once asking him if he believed in forever. He took a long pause, looked out at the horizon, and said, "I believe in moments that stay even after we leave them." That was the kind of man he was. He didn't chase permanence, he cherished presence. We lived in fragments, stolen hours, fleeting sunsets, spontaneous laughter, yet every fragment felt whole. The world might have seen our love as temporary, fragile, incomplete. But inside it, everything was complete. Every heartbeat felt like it carried centuries of emotion, as if we'd lived this love 1,000 times before and were lucky enough to find it again. Sometimes when he looked at me, I'd feel an ache, the kind that comes from knowing something this beautiful can't stay untouched. Maybe that's why I tried to memorize everything: the way he said my name, the warmth of his hands, the way his eyes softened when he was lost in thought. I wanted to hold on to the feeling, even if I couldn't hold on to the time. He taught me that love doesn't have to last forever to be real. It doesn't need labels or timelines. It just needs to be honest. To be lived, not planned, to be felt, not defined. There was one evening, golden and quiet, when he said, "You know, if love had a sound, it would be silence, the kind that feels full, not empty." And I understood. What we had wasn't about words. It was about everything that existed in between them. The small looks, the shared breaths, the warmth of just knowing. When the time came for him to leave, there were no promises, no tears, no dramatic goodbyes. Just a look, the kind that said everything words couldn't. I didn't ask him to stay, and he didn't ask me to wait, because we both knew some loves aren't meant to be caged by time. Some are meant to teach you that infinity can exist in an instant. After he was gone, I thought the silence would hurt, but it didn't. It felt sacred, like he had never really left, like the moments we shared had stitched themselves into my being. I carried them quietly, like light under my skin. He didn't promise forever. He didn't need to, because what we had didn't end, it simply became part of me. And even now, when I close my eyes, I can still feel it, that infinite moment where love needed no future, no words, no promises, just the truth of two souls meeting and knowing, if only for a while, that this was everything. When he left, it wasn't just him that disappeared. It was the sound of laughter in the corners of the house, the warmth in the air that made ordinary days feel alive, the quiet comfort that once filled every space he touched. It felt like the world exhaled and forgot how to breathe again. Every sunset became a reminder, every morning a struggle between pretending and remembering. He hadn't just been a person, he had been a place, a living, breathing home where everything felt right even when nothing else did. The night he walked away wasn't loud. There was no shouting, no breaking. Just silence, the kind that hums deep in your chest and takes its time to hurt. I watched him pack, not because I wanted to stop him, but because I needed to see the reality settle into something tangible. Each item he folded, each step he took closer to the door, felt like watching colors drain from a painting you once called beautiful. He looked back once, just once, and smiled in that quiet, apologetic way that says, "I wish this were different." But life doesn't change because we wish it would. It changes because it has to. And that's the cruelty of it. Love can be real, deep, and still not enough to make two paths stay crossed. After he left, the silence became a weight. The house that once echoed with shared laughter now felt too big, too cold. The bed seemed wider, the walls seemed hollow, and every little thing, a mug, a book, a shirt left behind, carried echoes of him. I used to wake up thinking I'd hear his voice, his footsteps, the gentle hum of him moving around. But there was nothing, just stillness so sharp it felt alive. I tried to convince myself that people leave all the time, that love fades, that memories soften. But he wasn't just anyone, and what we had wasn't just love. It was the quiet knowing that I had finally found somewhere I belonged. He had this way of making the world feel less heavy, of turning the simplest moments into something sacred. And now that he was gone, it felt like every safe place inside me had gone with him. Days blurred into nights, the seasons changed, but I didn't. I'd see couples laughing, hear a song we once played, catch a scent that reminded me of him, and it all came rushing back. The ache, the warmth, the unbearable beauty of what was lost. I used to think pain was loud, but this wasn't. It was quiet, the kind of pain that sits deep inside you, breathing slowly, never leaving, never healing completely. There were moments I'd catch myself smiling at memories, the way he'd tease me when I was upset, the way he'd rest his chin on my shoulder when I cooked, the way his eyes would light up at something simple, like rain. And then, as quickly as the smile came, it would fade, replaced by the truth that those moments would never return. They had become ghosts, soft and untouchable. I used to look for him everywhere, in faces, in voices, in the way strangers laughed. I told myself it was just habit, but it wasn't. It was hope, fragile, foolish hope that somehow, somewhere, he'd look back and realize he'd left something behind he couldn't live without. But time has a way of teaching even the most stubborn heart that some goodbyes are meant to last. The hardest part wasn't that he left, it was learning to live in the spaces where he once existed. The empty side of the bed, the chair he always sat in, the sound of the door that would never open again to him. Every corner became a museum of us, untouched, sacred, unbearable. People said time would heal. It didn't. It just taught me to carry the ache differently, to fold it into my days, to smile even when my heart still flinched at the thought of him. I learned how to exist without the one who once made existing feel effortless. But even in the grief, there were small mercies. The realization that love, even when it ends, leaves something behind. It changes the way you see the world. It makes you softer, deeper, more aware of the fragile beauty of connection. He may have left, but he also gave me a way of feeling I can't unlearn. Sometimes, late at night, I still talk to him, not out loud, but in the quiet of my thoughts. I tell him about the things he'll never see, the places I've gone, the ways I've grown, and somewhere between memory and dream, I almost feel him there. Not as the man who left, but as the love that once was home. People think losing someone means they're gone, but it's more complicated than that. When you love deeply, their absence doesn't erase them, it becomes part of you. You carry their voice in your silences, their warmth in your coldest moments, their memory in every choice you make to keep living. He took the future we might have had, but he left behind the parts of me that learned how to feel, how to love without holding back, and maybe that's what love does, it breaks you just enough to make you real. There's still a part of me that aches when the sun sets, when the sky bleeds into that same color it did on the day he said goodbye. It's not pain anymore, not exactly. It's remembrance, a quiet acknowledgement that I once knew a love that felt like home. And even though he's gone, even though life has moved forward in ways I never imagined, I know this: he didn't just leave. He became the sunsets I still stop to watch, the silence I've learned to find peace in, the heartbeat that reminds me I survived loving deeply. He was more than a person. He was every safe place I ever knew, and losing him wasn't the end. It was learning to build a new home within the emptiness he left behind. There comes a time after loss when silence becomes a teacher. Not the kind that comforts you, but the kind that strips you bare until all that's left is truth. In the beginning, the silence was unbearable. It echoed with his laughter, his words, his warmth, the rhythm of a life that no longer existed. Every corner of that quiet reminded me that he was gone, and that everything I once leaned on had disappeared with him. For so long, he had been my anchor, my calm, my belonging. I had built my world around him. Every dream, every heartbeat, every decision shaped itself in the shadow of our love. When he left, it felt like I was being asked to live without air. The days blurred into each other, and I kept searching for him in everything: in the sky, in the sound of rain, in the spaces between my own thoughts. At first, I thought healing meant forgetting. I tried to silence the memories, to drown them with distractions, to fill the emptiness with noise. But no matter how far I went, his absence followed, not because he was still there, but because I hadn't yet learned how to be without him. I was still reaching for a home that no longer existed. There was one morning that changed everything. I woke up before dawn, the world still dark and quiet, and for the first time I didn't cry. I just sat by the window, watching the faint glow of light crawl across the sky. It was so simple, so ordinary, but in that stillness, something inside me shifted. I realized that the world was still moving, still breathing, even though he wasn't here, and maybe I could too. I began to do small things, not to forget him, but to find myself again. I made coffee the way I liked it, not the way he used to. I walked alone, not to chase memories, but to listen to my own thoughts. I read books I'd always meant to, cooked meals just for me, learned to sit with silence without fearing it. Every act felt unfamiliar at first, as if I was meeting myself for the first time. There were days I failed, when loneliness crept in like a cold wind. I'd find myself missing his voice, the way he'd say my name, the comfort of knowing someone was waiting on the other side of the day. But even in those moments, I began to see something I hadn't before. I was still standing. I was still breathing. I was still capable of creating warmth, even without him. I realized I had mistaken love for home. I thought belonging came from being seen by someone else. But as the days turned into months, I began to see that home wasn't a place or a person. It was a quiet strength that had been inside me all along, buried beneath the need to be loved, waiting to be rediscovered. There was a softness that began to return, not the kind he gave me, but the kind I learned to give myself. I started to smile without guilt, to laugh without remembering. I found beauty again in simple things: the smell of rain, the hum of life outside my window, the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. It wasn't the same kind of happiness I had with him. It was quieter, deeper, and more honest. I began to understand that loving someone deeply doesn't mean losing yourself in them. It means allowing love to teach you who you are, and when it's gone, using that lesson to stand taller, breathe deeper, live freer. He had loved me in a way that made the world feel infinite, but it was in losing him that I learned how to fill that infinity myself. There were moments when I caught my reflection and didn't recognize the person looking back. She looked stronger, calmer. There was still sadness in her eyes, but it wasn't the same kind of pain. It was softer, wiser. It carried both loss and gratitude, gratitude for what once was, and for what it had taught her to become. Sometimes I think of him still, not with longing, but with peace. I imagine he found what he was searching for, just as I eventually did. I no longer hate the emptiness he left behind. It became the space where I rebuilt myself. The silence that once hurt now feels sacred, a reminder of both what I lost and what I found. Healing didn't come like a sunrise. It came slowly, in fragments, in the courage to wake up, in the strength to try again, in the quiet moments when I realized I didn't need to be found to feel whole. Every scar, every tear, every memory became part of me, not weights to carry, but roots that grounded me deeper into who I am. He used to call me home. I used to believe it. I thought his love gave me meaning, that his presence completed me. But what I've come to understand is that I was never incomplete. I was always whole. I just needed to remember. Now, when I look back, I don't see a story of loss. I see a story of becoming, of loving deeply, losing fully, and finding something even more sacred, myself. He was a chapter, a beautiful one, but not the book. The story didn't end when he left. It began when I started to live for me. And maybe that's what love is meant to do, not just to hold you, but to awaken you. To break you open so that you can meet yourself again, softer but stronger, wounded but wiser. He wasn't my home, I was. If this story touched your heart, even for a moment, let it stay. Let it remind you that love doesn't end when someone leaves. Sometimes it begins with you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every story here carries a heartbeat, a lesson, and a little light for the days that feel heavy. Join this journey of love, loss, and becoming your own home, where every ending softly whispers a new beginning. Until the next story, take care of your heart and remember, the truest home you'll ever find is the one within you.